Coordinator for the Florida Department of Transportation. Welcome everyone to the second Roadside Chat. It's exciting to have you all here with us today. This Roadside Chat series was developed to draw the byway community closer together and to offer valuable information, not just to the byway organizations, but to everyone. And the goal of these chats is to encourage interaction, partnerships, and camaraderie. So Karen is going to go ahead and keep everybody muted and unmute Doug when we get started. If you have any questions, and I hope you do, please submit them in the chat box and we'll get to those at the very end. And at any time you have any ideas or thoughts about future topics, topics of interest, please submit them to us and we will research it and try to get those folks engaged with our roadside chats and get them to present. So this month's chat will provide an overview of the Florida's paddling trails and will be presented by the renowned Doug Alderson. Prior to his current role as the Outreach and Advocacy Director for the Apalachicola Riverkeeper, Doug worked as the Florida Paddling Trails Coordinator and the Assistant Bureau Chief for the Florida Office Greenways and Trails, which is a part of the DEP Division of Recreation and Parks. During his 15 years with the Office of Greenway and Trails, Doug mapped out over 1,500 miles of the Florida Circumnavigational Saltwater Paddling Trail, which resulted in several new trails that were added to the system. Doug is also an award-winning author of several published books. We are so honored to have you here, Doug, including the titles are America's Alligator, A New Guide to Old Florida Attractions, Wild Florida Adventures, and The Great Florida Seminole Trail. So in 2015, Doug was awarded the first ever Environmental Leadership Award by Paddle Florida. Doug, thank you so much for being here with us today, and it's all on you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's great to be here, and it's always it's a pleasure. We're all getting used to this online presentation mode, but I look forward to when I actually can present to groups in person and see people's faces and see reactions and stuff. At least I can see some of your faces. I gave a presentation last week. They had 100 people, but none of them were visible. They kind of somehow were able to block everybody out, and I just felt like I was speaking into a void. So this is a little better. I'm going to show you some slides and everything. I won't read every word of the PowerPoints. I did send a copy to Karen and Mike yesterday, and so if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, they have a PDF of it. So, but I think some of this you'll find interesting. Many people are pretty aware of the some of the bike trails along scenic byways, but not always all the paddling trails. And so, and give me a thumbs up, Claudia, if you can see the PowerPoint okay. Is that a big, or just let me know if you can't see it. Okay, that's good. Oops, somehow it's at the end of it. Oops. Not sure what happened there. Okay, so this is the map that you'll find on the website for the Florida Office of Greenways and Trails, and you can type in Florida Greenways and Trails and it will come up on Google, and I will, at the end of the presentation, I can put that in the chat room if you want to see a link. But more than 4,000 trails in the state. 68 are state designated trails, but this is not all the paddling trails in the state. These are just the ones that have state designation that are featured on the state website. So there are other paddling trails that may not be designated that you can feature on the scenic byways. But the next slide will give you, you can see all the scenic byways with the state designated paddling trails. And so this was made by Justin Baldwin at the Office of Greenways and Trails, got the shape files for these. And so you can see how many of these intersect, and it would be easy to promote paddling trails along many of these scenic byways around the state, and vice versa, really. I know in our Big Bend Scenic Byway, I'm very familiar with that one, and there are many paddling trails that are promoted along that byway, and people use the byway to access these paddling trails. So Florida is an incredible state, being such a water state with the rivers, lakes, coastline, and so paddling makes a lot of sense in Florida. Probably has more water than about any other state in the country, and certainly more year-round paddling. Right now, they're not doing a whole lot of paddling up in Pennsylvania and places like that, but in Florida, yes, they are. So it's definitely a year-round destination. And all kinds of paddling too, sea kayaking to canoeing, paddleboarding. There's the sit on top kayaks versus the 18-foot sea kayaks. There's all different ranges of skills and type of craft. So this is the trail that Claudia mentioned that I mapped out. This was put into law, and so they hired me to basically map every mile of the Florida coast. It took me about 3 years to map it out. And the biggest challenge was finding overnight stops for someone doing the entire trip. The entire trip is 1,500 miles, and it takes 3 to 4 months on average to do the trip if you did it in one shot. So every year, maybe 3 or 4 people do the trip, and we have several people that are doing it segment by segment over several years. As they have vacation time, they'll do some segments. It's pretty specialized. It's for sea kayaking. People that know how to do open water paddling, that know the safety protocols, and of course, thousands go out on day trips using this trail as well, not just the super paddlers. And what's fun about this trail too, a few years ago, our office started a reunion with the Florida Paddling Trails Association, people doing the trail or who wanted to do the trail. And usually about 30 or 40 people would meet somewhere in the state. They'd go kayaking, they would hear presentations, stories from the trail, hear all the adventure stories and the just the different things that happen for people. And so it's a lot of fun connecting. This middle photo is a family that's doing the trail over several years. So that was pretty fascinating to hear about their adventures. So it's for all ages, really, as long as they know what they're doing. And of course, for safety, the office helps coordinate some paddle sports training. Of course, many outfitters around the state also do the training. The problem in our state, in some ways, you can go out to any box store and buy a kayak with absolutely no training whatsoever. And so they go out and they launch it, and they may not know the laws about kayaking. They may not know any of the safety protocols. And so it's good to have some background before you do some of these trips. So paddling trails offer many things besides physical fitness. It's a boost to the economy, promotes conservation, environmental awareness. And this is some of the economic studies. So this is part of the Florida recreational program that is made, the plan, it's made every 5 years. And so the state decided in 2017 that they would do the first ever economic study of the different recreational pursuits in Florida. And paddling was $3 billion a year estimated income for the state. And bicycling was way up there. And the number one thing that no surprise is basically fitness, walking, and jogging. So that's something people can do just around their neighborhood, but sometimes they do travel and do it on trails and different events. So this study they're scoping out the study right now, and the Florida Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, the SCORP, they call it. And it is on the Office of Greenways and Trails website. So if you look in the column there, the office now manages that study, and Justin Baldwin is the person that's heading that up. So if you want input on the study, on this coming study, which will take a couple years to complete, he is the contact person for that. And this ties in with the physical fitness, showing some of the calories that you can burn doing canoeing and kayaking. Of course, it depends on what type of journey it is, whether you're going downstream on a swift river versus going upstream or against the wind. It really varies, but you can burn some calories when you're canoeing and kayaking. So a lot of people ask, how do we create a paddling trail? We know of a creek or some river section. And so keep in mind that the majority of people that use the paddling trails are in the kind of beginner, moderate, skilled stage. And so they want trails that are not that long, that it's good to have them lead to a destination. And on the average, when you estimate how long it takes to do a trail, for a real, leisurely trip, it's about 2 miles an hour. If you go on the Apalachicola River, with the current going pretty fast, though, it may be 4 to 5 miles an hour. But on the average, we estimate, 2 miles an hour would be a good thing to estimate when you put that out on the information. So one thing you have to decide is the target audience. Is it families? Is it the skilled paddlers? Get input from the local paddling clubs and outfitters. A lot of times people want to put together a paddling trail and they really aren't paddlers themselves. And so they really have to engage the local paddlers and outfitters to get input, especially when they're putting in a launch. I've seen some launches around the state that are not built by paddlers, and they are using too much concrete, and they're not really that workable. They don't make a lot of common sense when some paddlers try to use them. So if it's a tidal place, visit at different tide levels and seasons, because it could vary. Recruit some experienced paddlers to really scout it out. In this photo here, I was scouting some of the waterways around Crystal River area, and we got lost. We were trying to get the GPS points for the mapping of the trail, and in that process, we got lost ourselves. And so here this guy's standing up so he can see over the marsh grass and see why we took the wrong turn. And it turned out to be a beautiful creek, but it was a dead end. So we did get the right route, obviously, and we mapped it out with the GPS points. So it's good to include some of the safety information on a trail, some types of things to look at, maybe some websites to look at the weather and the wind conditions. And if it's a marine environment, look at the marine forecast, all these things. The worst thing to do is to go out and not look at the forecast and suddenly a big wind comes up, around 11 o'clock and you're dealing with 20, 30 mile an hour winds and you're in trouble. So it's easy to avoid that if you look at the forecast ahead of time. And as a lot of people have reminded folks on the Circumnavigational Trail, the most important decision you have to make every day is whether it's safe to even go out that day. Look at the forecast, and you may have to stay in camp an extra day. And it's good to include information about universal accessibility. It doesn't always have to be a ramp that has a lot of concrete and everything. Sometimes it's just a solid type ramp, and maybe there's a transfer rock or something they can use. But it's good to describe that to see if someone in a wheelchair could access that ramp. Certain rivers, the ramps are pretty steep, and it's good to mention that. So in management of paddling trails, some of these rivers and creeks, they can after a storm, they can have blowdowns. Well, who's going to go out and clear a path in there? In North Florida, a lot of times fishermen will do that. They'll just go out on their own and keep a path open. But in other places, we don't always have that. So the state's not the one that really goes out and clears all these blockages. Office of Greenways and Trails, I was a staff of one. I wasn't going out with a chainsaw all over the state and clearing paddling trails. So we tried to designate managers that could do that. And some trails that we inherited didn't really have a manager, and so that was a challenge. Sometimes we got local paddling clubs, sometimes occasionally a government agency, occasionally a state park if there was one nearby. So mapping is important. I'm doing some maps for the Apalachicola Basin, and since we don't have all the GIS programs, and I'm not especially that skilled with all the GIS programs, I'm using Google Earth Pro, and it's working pretty good. It's pretty simple. But for maps that are a little more involved, it's good to have maybe a GIS person to do the maps. And these are just some of the icons to include on a map. If you have a campsite, if there's drinking water there, shower, restrooms, and or it's just primitive. It's good to have that information so somebody can plan their trip. If they're going out for 3 days, are there places that they can replenish their water supply? That's very important information to include. And sharing some of the emergency contact numbers on any type of trail is important as well. And having a float plan template, that's something that you would leave with loved ones to anticipated time of return. My wife always asks me every time I go out, what time should I expect you back? So I always try to tell her exactly within a range of an hour or two. You know, if it's dark and I told her I'd be back at 3, well, she's going to call the police or the FWC. So one of the things that is important, a lot of people don't realize on a GPS is that there's different ways to use coordinates. A lot of times the decimal degrees minutes is something that your GPS program is already coordinated for, but you have to switch that on your index to whatever the mapping program is using. The state uses decimal degrees. And so I got a call from somebody on the Ocalaocta River saying, all of your coordinates are wrong. I said, are you using decimal degrees on your GPS? And they didn't know what I was talking about. So it's important to educate people to know what type of coordinates to use on their GPS unit. Otherwise, it'll be wrong, as this person found out. So if it's an overnight trip, you know, if it's several days that you can go on a river or a coastline, describe the camping opportunities or motels that you can access. For certain motels, it's challenging to access them. There could be a high dock at low tide. Those type of things are good to describe. And it's good once you map out a trail to test the results. Maybe bring some beginners along and see if they're able to follow a map and use a GPS and find the places you're talking about. And sometimes that feedback is very valuable, and you can do some good tweaking of the maps and the guide from that. And it's good to promote the local outfitters and everything, but instead of, if you don't list everybody, then somebody's going to feel left out. So it's good to maybe just link to websites of the local chambers of commerce, for example, instead of trying to keep up a list of the outfitters, because believe me, outfitters can come and go, and that list can become outdated. So hopefully the local chamber has an updated website that they can keep updated. You can just link to. In some places, maybe one outfitter for the entire river, so that's easy. But in other places, there might be 5 or 6 or more. And it's good. We don't want to impact areas by having too many people or putting campsites in the wrong place, that type of thing. So it's good to educate people about the low impact principles, the leave no trace principles. And some of the amenities, of course, restrooms, fresh water. This photo up here is for kayak storage, and so that's at one of the state parks, Cayo Costa. You can actually store your kayak and lock it up in a locker, and because you're going to have to hike to the other side of the island or take a shuttle for the camping site, you can't bring your kayak there. So these things are good to have. Surfaces for launches include even outdoor carpeting or rubber matting. Depends on each launch is different. Sometimes you can use sand or some natural rock. Other places, the matting is important, can be used. So some kayak trails like the Calusa Blueway, they have signs in the water for 190 miles of trails. But they have some money from bed taxes. They have people that manage those signs, that keep the trail up to date, and they are able to keep those signs in place after storms and so forth. A lot of other places don't have that luxury, so it's best to really go for more of the GPS type coordinates to map a trail. And so people just need to know how to use the GPS. To put signs in the water, it's a lot of red tape and regulatory permitting with the Coast Guard and the FWC. And you can put signs on land if you own the land, and that's not a problem. But in the water itself, it can be a navigational hazard, so you have to do it right. So that's not always the best way to go, is put signs in the water, unless you have personnel and money to maintain them. And promoting the trail is fun. You can use riders, you can use different clubs, you can plan different trips. The one thing I noticed, a lot of promotional videos, what they don't do is they don't have people wearing life jackets. So it's kind of like showing a lot of bicyclists without helmets. And so it's important to promote safety that way and make sure everybody has a life jacket. By state law, you have to have a life jacket on your boat and a whistle within reach. And if you don't have that whistle in reach, you can get fined, I think, $75 just for a whistle. And it's a $2 investment. So it's good to have that handy as well. And when you do have a trail, this is a trail system in Wakulla County, and they were smart because they weren't really kayakers, and so they got the different kayakers together to help them plan and map the trails. Then we had a big celebration down at St. Mark's for the Wakulla County paddling trails. And so it's good to have these kickoff events, and it can really promote the trail. And sometimes it's fun to be creative on marking the trail. This is for the Circumnavigational trail. We decided, we had a kayak donated to us that was fairly old. We cut the kayak in half. I cut it in half with a Sawzall, which was, for a plastic kayak, was surprisingly simple and easy. It was almost scary how fast I cut through it in like 5 or 10 minutes. And we put one half at one end of the trail at Fort Clinch State Park, and the other half was at Big Lagoon State Park in Pensacola. And so you can start at one end and then see the other half of the kayak after 3 or 4 months if you want. We embedded the kayak in concrete. It still held up through the storms. The sign of Big Lagoon blew off at with Hurricane Sally this year, but the kayak stayed standing. So so far so good. The National Recreation Trail designation is good to highlight and raise the profile of a trail, and it's not that hard to do. You can find this information online. Many of our Florida trails are also a national recreation trail. It's really just more publicity, and you can sometimes get more grants when your trails are designated. It's one good thing about having a state designated trail and a national trail is it helps with grant proposals for launches and campsite development and things like that. And having events like Paddle Florida or paddling festivals can bring a lot of people and really familiarize them with the area, and they will often come back. I've seen that happen. The Putnam County decided to do paddling trails maybe 12 or 15 years ago, and I kind of gave them the different steps, ideas that they can use, and they followed them, and it was amazing that their trails are now on the map and people go there often to paddle because they did do many of these type of steps and have events and so forth and put their trails on the map. And these are some photos from Paddle Florida, and they do about 6 trips around the state a year, along with a paddling festival along the Swanee River in April. And so that's one way to highlight a trail, is to invite that group to do a trip, multi-day trip. So my current job, I am focusing more on the Apalachicola Basin, and so I help coordinate the annual Apalachicola River Trek, and this is a fundraiser and an awareness raiser for usually up to 15 people a year, usually in October of each year. So we use the Apalachicola River is the only Florida river that has its origins in the mountains of the Appalachians. And so it's a very unique river that way because a lot of the plant seeds have floated down, and some of the ravines look like mountains sometimes. And you have a lot of mountain species and rare species that are found in these ravines and on some of the bluffs. This lower part is the Apalachicola River, where the Flint and the Chattahoochee come together, and it's all mapped out for about 10-mile stretches. You can find this on our website, and it has the largest bluff system in Florida. This is Allen Bluff, rises about 110, 120 feet above the river, and if you camp across from it on a sandbar, the sunset hits that with the beautiful colors. And you can also hike a trail on the other side of it for a couple miles to the Bluff View, which is one of the best views in Florida. I was up there last Saturday. And all kinds of wildlife. These are avocets, but a lot of bald eagles this time of year. There's some alligators, of course. I've seen bears come down to the water. A lot of deer, turkey. It's just fun to go quietly and see what comes down to the sandbars early in the morning, usually. And in the fall, usually the water is kind of low and there's lots of sandbars for camping and you can really spread out. And so this is a scene with the moon rising on a sandbar near Weewa-Hitchcock. It's nice about sandbars, the ground's kind of soft, and so it kind of, it's nice to have a pad, but it still cushions you a little bit. And we usually have speakers. We're trying to educate the folks. They become river advocates as well. So we get biologists and state park people and different experts about the river. One guy always brings out lots of snakes, including water moccasins and stuff. And it's just amazing to get that education every night, pretty much. Now we're standing on top of Sand Mountain, which is about 3 stories tall, but this was created by the Corps of Engineers when they were dredging the river, which stopped about 15 years ago. But this is an example of almost like river destruction, even though it's like a neat view. It basically blocked off a slough and caused a lot of problems in the river. And we're still dealing with that from the dredging and the extra sand that gets in the sloughs and clogs them up during low water. So we do lots of swims and have lots of fun as well. It's kind of like summer camp for adults. So if you're interested in applying, we have an application system opening up in late January, and we pick the team by mid-April. It's usually about 15 to 16 people. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to have some experience. And we do raise a lot of money as well. This year, last 3 years, we've raised over $60,000 for the Apalachicola River Keeper. So it's our major fundraiser. And we also work with WFSU quite a bit, and they do lots of videos about the river trek and about the river itself. So you can go on the website of the WFSU television and see lots of 5-minute programs dealing with the river and the river trek. And this is the website for the river trek and the Apalachicola River Keeper. Okay, so I'll close that. I'm going to, in the chat, I'm going to type in if I can get to the website of the Florida Office of Greenways and Trails. Let me see. You're not be able to get that. Well, there it is. I'll just put that in the chat room. And see if I can.
That was a fantastic presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'll go ahead and read them out to you.
Yeah, I don't see them right now. Okay.
Let's see. Does the DEP actively promote blueways?
They do. Of course, you saw their website, and I just put the website on the chat. Let's see, I don't know if you can see that. There's the website. So if you click on that, you'll see the Paddling Trails page. So you'll see the website. They'll often put in Facebook posts the sponsors of the trails. Each of these trails mostly have a sponsor, and they'll promote things as well. And when they get a state designation, it's a feather in their cap as well. And as I mentioned, it helps them with grant opportunities as well. And when a new paddling trail is designated, often there's a press release and so forth, so that helps boost them as well. The same is true of the National Recreation Trail designations. Those trails are announced usually on National Trails Day, the first Saturday in June, and usually that's put out by the Interior Department, and they put out a press release, and so that's another good PR opportunity.
Great. The next question I have here, is there a statewide advocacy group for paddling trails?
Yes, if you type in the Florida Paddling Trails Association, Florida Paddling Trails Association, that is the statewide advocacy group. I helped get that started in 2007. When I was finishing up the Circumnavigational Trail, I realized for this trail to succeed, we needed a group of volunteers to help maintain it and promote it. And so I got together all my contacts. I had about 150, 200 contacts. I sent an email to all of them. And I had over 70 people show up at Homosassa Springs. And that group agreed to start a statewide group, and that's what became of it. They also decided pretty quick they wanted to cover all paddling trails in the state, not just the Circumnavigational trail. So they do freshwater rivers and lakes, as well as the coastal trail as well. And so that's a great group to be involved with. And their website has a lot of extra information about paddling trails in the state. So it's a good group to get involved with. They have a Facebook post that's probably followed by, with the pandemic went way up, I think it's over 10,000 people that log on to that. So.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so
see,
another question is, does the state take nominations for additional?
Yes. The state does take nominations. The forms are fairly easy. You'll see them on the Greenways and Trails website. Look under the designations category. The key is to get sign-offs on people that manage the launches along the paddling trails. So paddling trails themselves are state property. The launches are not always state property. So if you're featuring certain launches, like run by a county or something, you want to get the county to write a letter of support or fill in a form for the designation. And then the designation goes before the Florida Greenways and Trails Council. That's an appointed council, a 20-member board, and they meet about 3 to 4 times a year. So once you've nominated, put the paperwork in, the council usually will meet within a couple months and take up the nomination. And it's not that hard. It's good to set, put together a slideshow or something to show people what the paddling trail is about and everything.
Okay.
I see a question about whistles, and that applies for freshwater as well as saltwater. And I believe it's to all self-propelled watercraft. You need to have a whistle, and so those blasts in the whistle, that's sometimes the only thing that will alert people if you're in trouble. And a lot of people, especially beginners, they don't wear life jackets. They think, well, I know how to swim. But I've helped a lot of trips on Paddle Florida trips and other trips where people have fallen in, they hit a snag the wrong way and they're in the water, and they never regret having that life jacket on when they're bobbing up and down in the water. And so I'm really sold on it after seeing lots of cases where people could have drowned, especially when the water's cold.
Yeah.
Let's see. Several byways have goals associated with blueways. What is the best way to formalize a partnership between the byway and the kayakers? Well, byway has a group or committee, and kayakers in an area usually have a club. And so to find that club would be important. Those clubs are listed on the Florida Paddling Trails Association website. So they're a good group to connect with, and they list the clubs on there, and as well as outfitters too. It's also good to connect with the local outfitters, and they will know who the local groups of kayakers are. There's also some kayakers that are meetup groups. They're not really formalized as a club, especially young people, but they have a meetup group, and so you can connect with them usually on Facebook or some kind of social media. Let's see. I read that the oysters are dying in Apalachicola Bay. Restoration efforts planned. Do you think we can restore? So the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has recently closed off Apalachicola Bay to all wild oystering with the tongs, very iconic image. And that's because the bay started dying after a big drought in 2012. And that's partly due to the water that's being consumed up in Georgia by farmers in the city of Atlanta. So lawsuits are trying to, hopefully will remedy that situation. One is going to the Supreme Court within 6 months. There's also a federal lawsuit in Atlanta that may address some of the problems. Some of it's with the Army Corps of Engineers and how they are regulating the water. But the other things, there are restoration efforts being planned. There's $20 million for the restoration of the bay. To culch the bay, that means putting out shells and maybe rocks and things that oysters can latch onto in the bay. And already the bay is showing some signs of recovery after being closed since August. So we're hoping this closure up to 5 years will recover the bay. Our group is also, we have a grant for restoring some of the sloughs that were blocked off by the Corps of Engineers dredging. So that involves basically opening up these sloughs by taking sand away from the sloughs that were plugging the sloughs. And that water then can then go through the floodplain, restore the floodplain, and feed the bay with more nutrients. And so that's important as well. So that's going on right now. That'll be finished in about 2 years. So hopefully between the different restoration activities within 5 years, the bay will come back. That's our hope.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about wildlife, Doug.
Yeah.
I think maybe the fear of encountering a gator keeps people away from this sort of activity. Is it true that they really don't mess with you unless you mess with them?
Yeah, if you I wrote this book on alligators. It's basically the popular history associated with the alligator, but I did look into a lot of the biological factors as well as the alligator attacks. And on average, maybe one person a year dies of an alligator attack, and maybe 2 or 3 are attacked by alligators. Maybe a couple are bit because they're handling alligators. They're basically trying to catch them.
Yeah.
I've seen hundreds of alligators in the wild. I do have a healthy respect for them, but I've never had an alligator aggressively approach me or attack me. And I've seen alligators dive in the water nearby because they feel safer in the water. So sometimes you'll see their bubbles go down and they are sinking down to the bottom. That's where they feel safe. They do not feel safe in the bank all the time. So I give them a good berth. I try not to go along a bank real close in case I startle an alligator, but I've never been attacked, and most people I know have never been attacked. On occasion, rarely, somebody might disturb a mother alligator by a nest, getting too close to it, and the mother alligator will rush the kayaker or a boater. It's pretty rare, but it can happen. And alligator attacks do happen on occasion, but they're pretty rare. You have more of a chance of being hit by lightning by far, and you should really watch lightning more than alligators in some ways. But that's the number one question I get when I speak out of state. I spoke at a conference in Washington State, a kayaking conference. That was my number one question. I gave several talks was, well, what about the alligators? And I just had to tell them the same thing I just told you.
Well, it's a real fear.
Yeah. And the most dangerous alligator really are not the ones in the deep wilds. It's the ones like near a canal or a golf course that have been fed by people. They lost their fear of people. They might be near a fish camp and they're feeding on fish heads and so forth. Those are the ones you got to watch. Not as much the ones like in the boonies of Florida. Those are the ones that are more spooked by you. They're more afraid of you than you by them, really. Yes. They do some hunting of alligators, and so that keeps them afraid of people. People are not traditionally food for alligators. They're not looking at you as food. People have not been around in Florida for very long compared to alligators. Did I see any American crocodiles? I've seen a couple down in Florida Bay area. And, Florida Bay, the crocodiles are coming back, but alligators in Florida, we may have 2 million alligators or more in Florida. Crocodiles, we might have 1,000 in Florida. So you might only see them around Key Largo, Florida Bay. Occasionally they go down the Keys a little bit and they go up into Biscayne Bay. They're pretty shy. They're not out to get you at all. They're not like a Tarzan movie when they're just trying to grab you as soon as you jump in the water type of thing.
Anybody else have any questions?
This is Mike Pelosi. I have one comment. Doug used to be a shack member, which should ring a bell with the byway folks. And I suspect that Doug was on the shack during the review of several of the designation applications for folks that are dialed into this call. He's always been a friend of the DOT and a friend of the byway organization.
Yeah, usually somebody in our office has been a member of the shack. And so yeah. I think Brittany Moore may still be on there. I'm not sure.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it definitely ties, the byways tie in so well with the different recreation pursuits, paddling as well as the bike the bike trails. And so I think it's great. And hiking trails and equestrian trails. There's so many different types of trails in Florida. You don't want to leave anybody out. And there's so many chances, so much public land in Florida and so many trails. And people are often want to access these trails. And why not have a scenic byway to do that and learn about other things like the history and the culture of an area as well.
Yeah.
I know the River of Lakes Heritage Corridor highlights the water activities quite a bit on their website and on their brochures because they're right there in the St. John's.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
And if somebody's a beginner paddler, it's sometimes good to go out either with a group or with an outfitter a couple times and get a feel for things. And they'll give you nice tips about paddling and equipment and so forth. Probably the one thing I wouldn't do is go out to a big box store and just buy a kayak without really testing something out. So what's nice about outfitters in the state, you can often test out and rent boats until you find the right one before you actually buy it. So.
Great advice.
It's like a bike, same way with a bike.
And I don't see any more questions.
Thank you, Doug. Good job.
All right,
Very
thank you.
good job.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, Doug.
All right.
So if anybody has any questions about the chats or today's presentations, just reach out to me, Claudia, and we'll get you some answers to you. And if you want a copy of the presentation, we can get that to you as well. And any future topics, reach out to us and let us know what that might be. And if you have a contact person, that's even better that we can reach out to.
Claudia, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I understand that you did a presentation yesterday to the DOT Transportation Symposium on the Scenic Highway Program.
I did, Mike.
I understand that that's taped in case someone missed it yesterday. They could also get a replay of that presentation. Is that true? That's
absolutely correct. Yes. So yesterday, I gave a presentation with the Transportation Symposium, like Mike said. It's gone virtual. You may remember that in the past it was a meeting in a hotel in Orlando or some other location in Florida. This year it's virtual, and if you're interested, I can send you the link, and all the presentations that have already occurred are accessible on this website, and any future presentations that might come down, you can register on that website for free and attend it, and you can send it to your friends and families. It's not limited to just DOT folks or people in the transportation industry. Just like this roadside chat, send it to your friends and family. It's open to everybody. Nobody will be excluded. Yes, so yesterday on that presentation, there was 640 people registered, but 482, was it? 482.
Something like that.
Yeah, so it was a very good turnout. Yes. Doug, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug.
So we're going to go ahead and close out, folks. I think Doug is frozen over there. Sometimes that happens on my end as well. So everybody,
he's frozen in a good position and not a weird.
Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye. Thank you all.